Welcome to From the Deep. I am Mike the Finder, and with me, as always, is my buddy, Book of Brett.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about the film Adventureland, which, what year is this from? I want to say 2009.
Well, I have it on DVD, so it's probably 1930, 32.
That sounds about right. I have it on Blu-ray here.
Yeah.
And it looks pretty decent, but this is also the 2009 Blu-ray release, so it looks 2009 decent.
See, and that was actually part of it, was having on a DVD with it being set when it's set, which we'll get into when we go into the review. I thought it actually almost added to it.
I can see that.
Almost in the way that, like, why I like old movies on VHS, because it's like that's how it was filmed and how it looked when it came out. But
it definitely feels 480 feels pretty terrible after you've been watching 4K stuff for a while.
Yeah,
it really does.
Yeah, well, maybe I was lucky, and this is one of those DVDs that's 560. It's not.
Okay, so before we get into anything else, let me go through my spiel here. If you're only watching this on YouTube, which is a brand new channel, make sure you go over to Spotify or iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and check us out over there, because we do both an audio version and a video version of this podcast. And make sure, if you're only listening to this, to go check out our new YouTube page, From the Deep. Now, like I said, this movie is from 2009, and it's got a ton of people in it. First of all, Jesse Eisenberg,
sure
Kristen Stewart, Bill Hader, Kristen Wiig, Ryan Reynolds, Martin Starr, who, by the way, is in Silicon Valley. So watching this was super weird. Right after I had finished Silicon Valley, going into this and seeing him 10 years earlier was really weird. Anyway, do you want to give us a synopsis of this film here?
Yeah, so this is basically a coming-of-age movie about Jesse Eisenberg's character. You'll have to apologize. I'm really bad with names of people in real life, even more so when it comes to characters in movies.
His name is James Brennan. I think everybody calls him Brennan.
So this is basically James and his friends they're planning a European trip before they go into, I guess, the next stage of college, because he's already taken some college courses at this point. Or he's going from one college situation to a new college situation. And in between, we have this trip to Europe planned. And going to grad school, has this trip to Europe planned, and when he gets back, he plans on going to New York. All this falls apart because his parents can't afford it, because we live in the real world, and so much of this movie is actually fairly realistic. That sometimes your parents just can't pay for your schooling, and so that's basically what ends up happening here. And he ends up having to get a summer job where he ends up meeting and befriending a lot of the people he works with. Ends up falling for this girl. Played by Kristen Stewart, who I think this is the role she was supposed to play, because she always seems like a damaged 20-something to me. And every role she plays, she feels like a damaged 20-something.
I've only ever seen her in a handful of things, so I don't.
But yeah, so anyway, bad things end up happening, of course, because it is a coming-of-age movie. And without spoiling the ending, of course, things work out in a positive way usually, but I won't give too much details as far as the ending goes.
Yeah, we'll get to the ending. I think this movie is right after all of the huge coming of age boom that happened in the mid to early 2000s, right?
Yeah.
Stuff like this is so mid 2000s, it's not even funny. Like this thing could not be made in any other time period, but it is set in 1987. That's a big thing. So there are no cell phones or anything else. This is late 80s small town theme park, which I have actually worked in one before, and
Mike was a carny.
It's exactly like this. I gotta be honest. A carny is a carnival. I worked at a theme park.
No, you'll always now be Carney Mike.
What are your overall thoughts on this? We'll just start there. We don't have to go in any specific direction, but
I really liked it.
Really?
I really like this movie. First of all, Bill Hader is just the gem the world needs and doesn't deserve.
He's pretty great.
That 4th of July scene where he gets so pissed when people are littering throughout this movie. And then there's the part where he takes over at the horse race and he's really into it. And it's just, Bill Hader might be my favorite part of this movie, but I liked it for more than just him. I liked it because it wasn't, I felt I could relate to it because I feel like the point in time that Jesse Eisenberg is dealing with this is closer to maybe closer to my age just in general, because a lot of coming of age movies are about like high school and stuff like that. Even though I can relate to them, it's kind of like you sit there and you're like, okay, it's almost like it's almost partially disinterested.
Yeah.
It was one of my issues with Ghost World. When we talked about Ghost World, one of my issues was these what's her face's character is that typical like I'm too good but I never feel good enough kind of character, and those characters rub me the wrong way, but it's because I can't relate to those characters. And these characters are, they're in their 20s already. They're already dealing with other stuff. And so I feel like it felt just like a bit more relatable than when it's like high school kids and teenagers.
Yeah, I think you're right. Because they're a little bit older in this, it does feel a little bit more like kind of what we went through and what most people go through, I suppose, in their early 20s, where you're like, you want to be independent, but you're not independent enough because you're not making enough money to really be your own person. And so you're still super reliant on the people that raised you. And it's like, there's that moment in time from like 18 to like 23 or 24. That's like, you don't have anything figured out really yet. And you're just sort of going with whatever happens. And everyone around you is in the exact same position. And so there's a lot of...
it's kind of the worst.
It is. And I would argue that moment in time is kind of worse than high school. And because high school is there's a lot of questioning and stuff going on. But I think when you get to your early 20s and you sort of realize that like, oh, I kind of have to figure out what I'm going to do and where I'm going to go and all these other things. And you're meeting these people that you connect with, but they're all exactly feeling the same way. And so everybody's emotions are just sort of bouncing off of each other. And
it's
everybody
like a
that
school
works...
of fish of personalities.
Yeah, well...
all over the place, sometimes colliding.
And when I said working at a theme park was exactly like this, what I meant was... all the co-workers hang out. They all get drunk together. They all like party together. And
it's like restaurants.
And it's very much like working at a restaurant, except it's in a theme park. It really is. I've done both. They're very similar.
Which one did you hate more?
Oh, definitely restaurants. But I was on...
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
But had I been a waiter in a restaurant, I would probably feel differently. Because
you were in the kitchen.
There's a very, very big difference on the people that are in the kitchen versus the people that are out front. So
that's why I never had issues with the kitchen people, because it's like, dude, I don't want to do it. Like you do it, but you do it on your time and let me know when you're ready.
That's a whole nother conversation, but often those guys are doing more than 3 times the work with half the pay. So
that's true.
So anyway,
just gonna say that
theme parks are very similar, and everybody's sort of intertwined with everybody's life, much as it is in your early 20s when you work at a job like that. And that's what I feel like this movie nails, is that feeling of like, if somebody at work knows it, everybody at work knows it, and everybody's going to talk about it. And it's just, they nailed that side of it.
Well, even the way Jesse Eisenberg's character treats the whole situation with Kristen Stewart's character.
M.
That's right.
M. E-M.
Just the way that that whole thing that felt relatable to me, simply because I can remember being in that like phase where like it's where you fall in love very easily, or you think you're in love very easily. Things that seem really important in an older, more mature relationship are meaningful, but they don't have the like world shattering potential of certain situations in a relationship at that age, because your emotions are still developing, which makes them very strong. And like we have this scene, there's that whole scene where he figures out what's going on between her and Connell, and rather than what an adult might do, which is confront someone after having processed the situation, he just runs on emotional energy, goes to the house, waits outside for her, confronts her right then and there. And that was the thing that really, really hit me hard, was how much they not just nailed the vibe of whether it's a carnival restaurant, whatever, the vibe of being young in a dead-end job, one you don't want to be in already, but then to nail that on top of the emotional turbulence and roller coaster ride of being just that age and being a virgin and being in love very easily. Like, I really think they nailed that as well.
No, I completely agree, dude. There are so many moments like that in this film where it's just, it's like they ripped moments out of my life and just filmed it. Like that scene that you were just talking about in particular is the perfect example of that, where you're just young and you're just like, but I need answers. And you just like
that whole scene that happened, I sat there like my eyes were literally watering up. I'm noticing as I get older, I get more emotional with movies that I can relate to. And as I'm watching this, I'm getting like emotional because I can relate to how he's feeling, but I also know that what happens on the other side of that door of confrontation is never what you want it to be.
Yeah.
It's not going to, that situation never ever ends the way you want it to, because you know why? It's terrifying to walk out of a place and see somebody that emotional that you weren't expecting to see there.
Well, it's also, what's crazy about that is you don't dislike Brennan at all throughout this whole thing.
Yeah.
And even though like he's sort of in that moment, there is the capability within him to like totally fuck everything up. And even when he tells Lisa P, even when he tells Lisa P about what M and McConnell are doing, I don't think he did it in a malicious way. He even apologizes to her later, but it was more in like a venting sort of way. And you can kind of relate to just being like, and then this thing happened. And you're like, oh, I should have said that. Oops.
Yeah.
And then now
especially
everybody
drunk,
at work knows.
I think we've all been there.
Right. And then everybody at work knows. And it's just like, that's what I feel like this movie does really well, is nail what it is like you said, to be in a dead-end job in your early 20s. And that's, I feel like it falls into some traps because of the wacky friend that's just a little bit too nerdy that Martin Starr plays, and like all of the indie coming of age tropes that are within this, because there's a bunch of them.
Totally.
But I think buried within that, if you can get past like the sort of tropey paint by numbers sort of coming of age thing about this movie, there's a really sweet film within this.
Right.
And it's not, I wouldn't even call it, like you had said when I was like trying to pick a movie, you had said, hey, let's do a comedy. And so I was trying to figure out like, okay, but we can't do like Elf or something. You know what I mean? Like there's not going to be a lot to say about Elf as far as a film goes. It's a great movie, but there's not a lot cinematically for you to pick apart.
Spotify listeners can't see my face right now, but it's a mixture of disgust, disappointment, and regret.
Everyone agrees with me. If you don't agree with me, I'm sorry. Elf is a great film. It is not a cinematic masterpiece. Is this news?
I will not sit here and let you speak ill of the creative works of Jon Favreau.
Oh, Lord. Adventureland is not like a comedy, technically. It's more like a coming-of-age film.
Yeah, but it's got more comedy. I think it's got more comedy. I don't want to say on the nose comedy, because it's not totally on the nose, but
It's dry. It's dry humor.
It's very dry, yeah, and especially Jesse Eisenberg's the stuff with that. Bill Hader's is a little bit more obviously funny.
That part where he pulls out the bat, he just doesn't even question it, and he just comes rushing out of the trailer with a baseball bat is one of the greatest scenes of
Give me a reason. Give me a reason.
He just goes from 0 to 100 so quickly, and then right back to 0, where he's leaning back over, like, okay, now break down these numbers for me again.
Thanks, man. Yeah, sure, no problem.
He doesn't even question why the guy was chasing him. He just, because you would think like, oh, this is going to be really bad for Jesse's job. And then like,
nope, doesn't even bring it up.
It's great. I don't know. I think this movie is also very well shot. That's one of the things that I was kind of surprised by. It's got a lot of really cool framing. But it also doesn't fall into the art house trap either. So it's not like Ghost World, and I feel like we're comparing it to Ghost World because they're very similar type of movies. They're both coming of age films. They tell the story in much different ways, but it's also the time period, I think, plays a huge role in Adventureland versus Ghost World. Ghost World's kind of like a little more timeless as far as that goes. This is so specific to the 80s. It felt really endearing to me, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah. I would agree with that. And a lot of it is, again, because of the time period that it's in. It fits in that time period and not in another time period. But at the same time, it's still relatable regardless of where you are in time to watching the movie.
Right. And I think, I wonder is it because we're two guys, we relate to this so heavily? Is that what it is? Because, I mean, I guess if I were female, I could relate to M just as much as I could relate to Brennan in this.
Yeah.
But M is kind of written as this dislikable character, but you end up by the end sort of like, I don't know, you kind of realize she tried to do the right thing by McConnell and like the whole thing, even if she did fall into this whole thing with him, which technically, is cheating and all that stuff. But
no, that I can't relate to because I've never ruined a marriage.
Right. Right.
But
that's the part. That's the part you kind of have to dissociate with. But
right. But at the same time, I think there's a really, really good scene where they talk about the double standard in that situation. Yeah. And I thought that was a really good way of handling it it was a good way of being woke, but not too woke.
Yeah, no, I agree. What does he say exactly? He goes, Lisa P goes, no, but you expect this sort of a thing from men. Men can't help it. And right. Jesse Eisenberg goes, oh, so women can be fucked up, but men can't be? Like right. That's kind of what it is. And it's basically pointing out the double standard of like, we're doing a terrible job of vocalizing it, but it's pointing out the double standard of like, people sort of expect men to cheat and people don't expect women to go along with the cheating and all this other stuff.
Right.
And especially I think in the 80s, that may have been much more pronounced than it was ever when the entire time we've been alive, really.
Well, and something I thought about that whole situation that was that they did in a nice subtle way, but still making it noticeable, was how Connell is really basically taking advantage of how naive M is in the whole situation.
He really reminded me of his character in Waiting.
That's like what
they're almost exactly the same character, where he's just sort of this older dude, but he's married. But he's still like, he works at this theme park where all of these 19 and 20-year-olds work. And so he just sort of does this every year whenever the park is opened. And it's very similar to his character in Waiting, where he's just sort of this misogynistic user. And so I think he's much more hateable in this, though. In Waiting, they almost do it in a sort of like laughy, and even Van Wilder, it's more like he's a misogynist, but everything's okay. Like that sort of thing.
He's funny, so we let him go ahead.
Right, which is totally screwed up in retrospect of all those movies. But within this,
I think with Waiting, it's more depicting the fact that I worked in restaurants for 11 years. There are guys that are like in their 30s, 40s.
You talk about relating to a dead end job. Waiting is that movie. Like we've both been in that restaurant before, and it's like that's how it is. But in this, he's they toe the line a little bit more of like trying to make him a little bit more relatable and not just the villain of the story, because it's like they very easily could have written him to be this humongous piece of shit. But every time they make him look like an asshole and a piece of shit, but not in a villain-esque antagonist sort of a way.
Yeah,
he's just
more in a scumbag kind of way.
Right. He's a scumbag. That's the perfect way to put it. Yeah, and it's not overplayed to be this huge thing. And I really like how M just sort of ends up like just sort of walking away from the whole situation. And I don't like how she runs away to New York and he chases her. That whole thing is a little much for me. Like him showing up in the rain at the end is a little much. And I also don't think we needed
Meg Ryan.
Yeah. I also don't think we needed to see him lose his virginity by the end of the movie. I thought that was a little strange.
See, okay, I'm actually really glad you brought that up and B have that opinion, because I actually thought they did that in a really good way.
It's shot really well.
Not even just, well, okay, so not even just that, but like not, and again, the whole going to New York thing is kind of like, even at that age, I would have been like, okay, bye.
Yeah.
And like move on with my life.
Right.
But the way I look at it was the whole virgin thing is hovering over him
it's
throughout the entire movie.
Yeah, it dictates how he acts a lot. Like a lot.
I really like how the very last line in this whole movie are we really doing this? And rather than going into a sex scene and ending it on a sex scene, we end it to there's a conclusion to the thing that's been hovering over him for years. There's a conclusion to the relationship. There's a it really wraps the whole thing up in a nice package, because we get a conclusion to basically every storyline going on in this movie.
Right.
That's why I like it.
I totally get that. I think you could get all the same conclusions with them cutting right after they walk into that apartment. Like, they have this conversation in the rain, they turn around and they walk into the apartment. I think you leave a little bit more things unsaid and stuff and situations unfinished. I think it would have been a stronger ending for me had they just walked into the building and then cut credits right after they walk into the building. Cut the weird sidebar about changing wet clothes and like all of that stuff. And I know all that leads into the sex scene, but it's like, I think you could have cut it right as they walk in there and you get all of the same things, except you kind of get to make up what happens to the rest of that whole situation, rather than okay, they have sex, they probably date, like all that stuff. So, yeah, I don't know. That's where my head was at when I finished this.
That's fair.
But this was good. I really like this. I know this is going to be one of the shorter movie reviews that we're going to do. We're running low on time here, so let's just go ahead and wrap this up. There's not a lot to pick apart cinematically within this movie. I think the camera work is good. There's nothing crazy that stands out. There's some really good framing. There's really, the color grading is good. It's a well-made movie. Nothing stands out to me about it though.
I would say that the story is really well written. All the characters are really, really well written. The acting was really good. There was no one that really stood out as like even Kristen Stewart, who not the biggest fan of.
Yeah, me neither. She's great in this movie though.
She did really, really well in this. Yeah.
She's totally believable. You can tell that she's become this thing of like with McConnell, that she doesn't really respect herself for it. And by the end of the movie, you can tell that she's like trying to become a better person and not like wreck a home or whatever, however you want to put it. And so like, I think her character is very well written, as well as every character in this movie. That's the thing I will say the most, is this is a very well written coming of age story. Yeah. And a lot of these coming of age stories, especially from this time period, are very like, okay, so we're going to have the Strokes playing behind them. They're both going to be in leather jackets. They're going to look at each other across the room in a punk show. And you know what I mean? There's a lot of that sort of stuff going on. and then the killers will start to swell in the background right before they kiss, and then credits. Like,
What if what if instead of a concert they're at a hat shop?
exactly. There's a lot of that, and then the homeless guy screaming about beef jerky goes running through the parking lot. Anyway, there's a lot of that kind of stuff, and
I like hot dogs.
this does have a lot of the tropes of those early 2000, mid 2000 movies, and I don't think this movie would exist without Juno and everything else like that, like those movies. But even beyond that, they do a very good job of getting out of that form factor and sort of telling a really good story. And the writer and the director nailed it. They just did such a good job, and I enjoyed this immensely. So, final thoughts.
I really feel like we covered everything.
Okay.
Honestly.
Cool.
Like usually I have some, but I mean, I really feel like we covered everything. What would you give this on a scale of 1 to 10?
I'm going to go ahead and rate this 7 out of 10. I like
7.
this. I like this a lot. I do not think this is a masterpiece, though. It's as good as the writing is, and as good as the directing is, a little long.
Yeah.
There's a few scenes here and there that don't need to be in there. I also think that there could have been more funnier stuff with the people that you have in this film.
Especially Martin Starr. I love Martin Starr.
I do too. And, he's so underutilized in this movie. Now, to be fair, this is before, this is after Freaks and Geeks and stuff, obviously, but this is before he really came into his own. And so I think that might be part of it. But with the cast that you have here, I feel like you could have done a lot more improv type stuff, and you could have come up with a lot more funnier things within this. But it is funny, just not in that way. Like, especially with Bill Hader, I think you could have done a lot more with that. But it's good, and I think 7 is a strong number. So
yeah,
what about you?
I'd say 7 sounds good.
Yeah?
7 sounds good. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Okay. All right.
I was gonna go 8, but then I really started playing with okay, what else have I rated 8? And no, 7 sounds good.
Yeah, I think 7's good. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it's no masterpiece.
Right.
It's pretty far from being I loved this sort of a movie. So
I will watch this every weekend, and when I get broken up with again.
So, okay, that's Adventureland. We don't have a lot to say about it, to be honest, just because it's just good. It's just a good comedy.
Really, we had a lot to say. It's just usually when we have a lot to say about something, it's either cynical or it's about camera work or lighting. And this was much more about the story.
Yeah. Well, it's also not the kind of film we've done before.
Right.
Which is one of the reasons I did want to do this, to see if we could pull off doing comedy stuff. And I don't know. I think maybe the next time we try this, we'll have to go even more comedy than this, and just to see what we can come up with. But I also don't want reviewing comedies to be, and then this happened, and it was so funny, and we both laughed and laughed.
We might as well do watch along videos at that point.
Right. So I usually try to pick films that are kind of left up in the air. And so you can sort of draw your own conclusions, and then we can talk about how each one of us sort of interpreted those decisions within the film. And with this, it's such a well-written thing, and it wraps everything up, like you were saying earlier, in such a nice little package that there's not a lot to interpret. All right, so I think that's where we're going to go ahead and call this episode. If you liked this and got all the way to the end of this, thank you guys so much. Make sure you hit the like button and the subscribe button if you really liked it, because we've got a lot more content coming on this channel. Thank you guys for watching so much, and we will see you next time on From the Deep. Bye-bye.
I love you.
That was weird. You're weird.
What?
You're weird.